Here, I would like to begin with a very simple visual observation. If we look at each script across different regions, we immediately see strong visual diversity. Here, all three examples mean snake, but the forms are clearly different. This kind of differences is very common in e-script. It is not just one or two unusual cases. Across different regions and different writing sources, we can find many examples like this. This example leads to a bigger question. How can we understand a writing tradition with so much variation? For me, the variation is not only a visual feature, it is also connected with how the script was used, copied, taught, and passed down in local communities. So, to understand those different forms, we need to look at the historical and social conditions behind them. I'd like to begin with some background about language and geography. This is a map of ethnic minority groups in China. China has 56 officially recognized ethnic groups. Among them, 55 are ethnic minority groups, and the Yi people are one of them. The Yi people mainly live in southwest China. Here, the blue circle shows the main area where many Yi communities live. When we look more closely, we can see that the Yi script is used across 4 provinces and regions: Yunnan, Sichuan, Guizhou, and Guangxi. The Yi language belongs to the Tibetan-Burman language family, and it includes 6 major dialect groups, as shown here. Different colors represent different dialect areas. So from this distribution, we can see that the Yi script is closely connected with different places, different communities, and different ways of speaking. This regional distribution is important for understanding variation. The script was not used in one single centralized environment. Instead, it was used and passed down in many local contexts. To understand why the forms became so different from region to region, we need to look beyond the map and ask how the script actually moved, stayed, and changed within local communities. Regional spread alone does not fully explain why the variation became so extensive. Here, I summarize the main reasons under 3 headings: BMO authority, manuscript transmission, and isolation. First, I should briefly explain the role of the BMO. The Bimo is a priest in the traditional religion of the Yi people. He is also an important transmitter of Yi culture and the leader of ritual practices. This role is often passed down within families, as you can see here. The Bimo is holding a manuscript. Those manuscripts are used for recitation and rituals, and they are written in Yi script. So the transmission of Yi script was closely tied to local culture authority, and local family religions. Second, most e-writing materials were passed down as handwritten manuscripts. They were copied by hand again and again over a long period of time. During this process, local differences could be kept, and new differences could also appear. So manuscript transmission did not simply preserve the e-script, it also helped create variation. Third, many e-communities were relatively isolated from one another. As this image shows, many e-communities traditionally live in mountainous areas. This made contact between different regions more difficult. Because of this, local writing traditions did not always influence each other directly. A form used in one area could continue for a long time, even if a different form was used somewhere else. So variation was shaped not only by language and handwriting transmission, but also by geography and local social conditions. Taken together, those 3 factors help explain why variation became so extensive. The result of the historical process is extensive variation. Here, for example, all of those different forms refer to the same meaning, stomach. So this is not just a minor visual difference. It creates a very complex situation where related forms are difficult to identify, compare, and organize. In other words, the system becomes very rich, but also very difficult to unify. Those differences should not be seen simply as random inconsistency or graphic noise. They came from repeated local decisions in how writing was copied, silicated, preserved, and transmitted. And once variation reaches this scale, standardization becomes historically understandable. After 1949, the Chinese government introduced a new policies for ethnic minority language and scripts. From this point, the standardization of e-script officially began, but the standardization did not follow one single path. Different regions developed different approaches. Let's first look at Sichuan. In Sichuan, the reform of the e-script was strongly influenced by the development of Hanyu Pinyin. This is a Latin alphabet system used to write the pronunciation of Chinese. Between 1941 and 1948, 58, researchers moved away from the traditional e-script and created a Latin alphabet-based phonetic scheme for Sichuanyi. As we can see from this image, this scheme completely changed the visual appearance of the e-script. Its letter form were based on the Latin alphabet rather than on traditional e-characters. However, this new phonetic script did not fit well with the reading habits and communication needs of e-communities. More importantly, it broke away from the traditional writing form that carried e-culture. For this reason, it was difficult for this scheme to be widely accepted in e-communities. After this, several other schemes were proposed, including schemes that use Chinese culture. But in the end, a new standard was developed by selecting more than 800 characters from the traditional e-script used in Sichuan. This scheme first became a provincial standard, then a national standard, and later entered the international character encoding standard. This was a major achievement, but the success of the one standard did not mean that it could automatically become a shared solution for all e-writing traditions. In other regions, standardization continued in different ways. For example, with government support, Yunnan published the Yunnan Standardized E-Script Character Set and Common Vocabulary. Guizhou also published a concise Chinese dictionary, Guizhou edition. So standardization did not lead to one single endpoint. Instead, several different decisions continued to exist. This raises an important question. If the Sichuan standard had already become a national and international standard, why did other regions not simply use it as a common solution? There are many reasons, including political and administrative factors, but here I want to highlight two other main reasons. First, the Sichuan standard was based on a regional pronunciation system. More specifically, it follows Xi speech in Sichuan, which belongs to the northern Yi dialect area. This means that the standard was not only a selection of glyph forms, it was also connected to one particular pronunciation system. For communities outside this dialect area, this made it difficult to use the Sichuan standard as a shared solution. Second, it also involved a different writing orientation. People mentioned it this morning. I recorded those two radio during field work in Liangshan, Sichuan in 2023 when I was speaking with local Bimo. The first radio shows how the Bimo writes the script. As we can see here, the characters go from top to bottom, and the columns move from left to right. The second video shows how the manuscript is read. What is interesting is that from writing to reading, the text is rotated by 90 degrees. So why does this happen? As we can see, this manuscript is very long and it is very difficult to hold by hand. A wooden stick is usually attached to one side. When the beam writes, they write from top to bottom with the columns moving from left to right. But during visual recitation, the manuscript can be hung from the stick. When it is hung, the whole manuscript is turned, so the text is rotated by 19 degrees. This point becomes clear here. On the left, we can see traditional writing direction from top to bottom and from left to right. But when the manuscript is rotated, the reading direction changes and produces the form shown on the right. The Sichuan standard adopted this rotated form as the basis for standardization. So the issue was not only layout, it also involved a change in glyph orientation and writing order. This is one reason. This is another one reason why the Sichuan model could not simply be adopted everywhere else. Even so, many scholars and language workers still hope that e-script could be unified in some way. Because of this, the e-script collaboration groups was established. They proposed a shared system across regions. Their main idea was to keep glyph form and meaning stable, while allowing different dialect groups to read their characters in their own way. This led to important cross-regional reference works. Another group of scholars asked a different question. If Sichuan Yi had already entered the international standard, why not use that as the basis for a common system? From this idea came another proposal, the common standard e-script character set. By this point, the situation was still quite complicated. Different schemes existed, but none of them became a widely used solution across all regions. My own research, however, focused on ideographic E rather than those proposed standard solutions. Before turning to write, I need to clarify how I use terms in this talk. When I say syllabic E, I refer mainly to the modern standardized system represented by the Sichuan standard E script. When I say ideographic E, I refer mainly to traditional character materials used in Yunnan, Guizhou, and Guangxi. Those are functional definitions for this research, not absolute classifications. I should also say that I have worked in practice with the syllabic system. This is one of my earlier type design projects for syllabic E. It is a multi-script type family including Hanzi, Yi, Latin, and Arabic. It was my first E-type design project and it was designed mainly for short texts. This is another type design project I made for syllabic E. Compared with the previous one, this typeface has a more modern style and it's more suitable for display use. It also includes multiple scripts, including Hanzi, Yi, and Latin. I also made some cute stickers with this typeface. So yeah, if you are interested, I can share them after the talk. Yeah. Through those design experiments with syllabic E, however, I gradually felt a strong limitation in the design process. One important reason is that the syllabic E does not always support a very natural or fluent writing rhythm in typographic practice. As we discussed earlier, this script was not originally used in the upright form in which it appears today. So my attention gradually shifted to ideographic E. But when I turned to ideographic E, I found that the problem was even more fundamental. Ideographic E is still not included in a unified character encoding system. This means it has no standard code points, and the materials are still mainly image-based rather than text-based. As a result, inputs, search, and storage are limited. So before a coding can be properly proposed, the script first needs to be organized as data. The Graphic Unicode Submission Working Group is working on this problem by organizing character data across sources. I'm part of this work, and it is still ongoing. This is an overview of working group's workflow, from source collection to the construction of the master glyph database. The main idea is simple. The project moves from separate documentary material toward a more structured comparative system. I will now go through the main steps. We begin with published source materials. There are the main sources used in this project, and they are both authoritative and historically important. To make later processing easier, each source is given a short observation such as U0, U1, D0, and Q0. This helps keep the workflow clear once the materials become larger and more complex. Once we had decided which main materials to use, we began scanning the documents, and then use AutoCAD for semi-automatic glyph segmentation. This is an example of AutoCAD in use. The software dedicates possible glyph arrays based on size setting. The green boxes show the headwords arrays that will be cut out as individual glyph images. After checking, each headword is exported as a separate image file. So at this stage, we have first image set for each source. But image files alone are not enough for later comparison and management. We need a way to handle the glyphs more consistently. So we began to organize them through font files. The next step was to turn the image into vector glyphs and connect them to structured data. Here, we use Font Creator to twist the glyphs and turn images into vector outlines. At this point, the scanned characters are no longer just images, they become vector glyphs that can be handled more systematically. Then we put those glyphs into font file and give them temporary code points. Those temporary code points are only internal labels for this research. They help us manage sort and display the glyphs consistently. Once the glyphs are in font files, they can be linked more easily to source information and structured annotation. So this is the point where visual form and source data begin to work together. The next step is to organize them in a more systematic way. For each source, a separate worksheet was created. All of them use the same basic structure with 10 fields for each glyph entry. Those include temporary code point, glyph, source reference, radical, schedule count, pronunciation, and mailing. At this stage, the four source tables contains around 2,600 to 4,100 entries each. This keeps the data clear, source-based, and traceable before we bring the source together. Once the source-based tables are ready, we can build the master table. The purpose here is to bring the different sources into one comparative structure. This figure shows an example of the master table. It includes 15 fields, covering things like radical, schedule count, forms from each source reference, mailing, and notes. The important point is not just that the table stores data. The important point is that it places different source traditions side by side in one comparative structure. In this comparison process, some forms show high structural consistency, while others show significant structural differences. So, the problem is not simply to connect forms. The real problem is to decide how different forms are related. If the forms are highly similar in structure, then we move to the next step, which is semantic checking. If both structure and mailing match, the forms are placed in the same row of master table. If the mailing does not match, then a new rule is needed. If there are major structural differences, we need to judge whether they should be treated as graphic variants or structural variants. Graphic variants differ only slightly. They still share close pronunciation, meaning, and structural inheritance. So they can be treated as one character. Structural variants differ much more strongly in form. Even when pronunciation and meaning are close, they should be treated as different characters. This is an example of graphic variance. The glyphs from U0, U1, and D1 show only minor visual differences. Since they all represent B-more, they are treated as the orthographic variants and grouped under a single entry. As we can see in row 3934, the forms from U0, U1, and D1 are placed in the same row because their differences are minor. This shows how graphic variants are grouped in this database. This is an example of structural variants. Here, the forms for skin or shell from U0, Q0, and D1 are much more different in structure. Even though the meaning is the same, the forms are kept in separate rows because the structural differences is too large. As we can see, how this is shown in the match table. The form for skin or shell are placed across row 577 to 579. They are related by meaning, but they are not merged into one entry because their structures are very different. After this stage of comparison and integration, we now have a core source match table. This work is still ongoing. So far, we have built a core source match table with about 600 and 900 entries. The value of this work is not that it immediately completes standardization, but that it builds a comparable, traceable, and extensible framework and provides important support for the future encoding of ideographic E. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Questions? I have questions. Yes.
Thank you, Jerry. Okay. I come from Yunnan and I'm focused on the endangered writing system of different minority ethnic groups in Yunnan province, including the E script. And so I'm just curious about your opinion about this question. So how do you think that does the encoding and typesetting of the current standard E-script pose challenges to the long-established writing conventions of traditional E-script, which used in the Yunnan, Guangxi, or Guizhou provinces? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a very important question, I think. How to say about the Sichuan standard E? A lot of people hate it. Me too, I don't like it. But I have to say it has been very successful because it is widely used in education, publish, digital import, and so on. Yeah, it was very widely used. During my field trip, I speak with the former director of Sichuan Liangshan Language Commission. What is interesting is that he even don't know the Sichuan standard is a new standard. He thinks like the e-script board like this, like the vertical one. So yeah, if you ask me how it is used in the Yunnan or other regions, I have to say, of course, they can't use it because it's totally different, I think. Yeah, but it is very successful in Sichuan. Yeah, like this. I hope. All right. Yeah.
Yani
Well, my question is more technical. Have you thought of an input method? Would you use something like Pinyin or Bopomofo or Congier?
For the systems language, we will use like international, how to say, international like phonological system, not is pinyin or others. Is connected to the international phonetic. It's just like use, yeah. They have its keyboard. It depends on phonetic, not the radical others. It depends on, yeah.
Every key character has a precise identifier phonetic, which you can input on the keyboard.
I can't, but who can read it, they can, yeah, they can input it. Yes. Thank you for your question.
Yes. What I was wondering was, did the Yi script descend from the Oracle bone script, just like the regular Chinese characters, or did it have a separate origin? And what about like other indigenous Chinese languages like Hokkien, Hakka, etc.?
Yeah, to be honest, the issue we don't know where it starts.
Okay.
Some people say that it starts earlier before the Oracle bone script, like that. Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing talk. I think. I think because I haven't do the structure analysis about this. For the Chinese, they have like a component like that. It depends on the component, right?
Yeah.
But for the script, I think it's totally different from Oracle or from the Chinese culture. But I haven't started it right now. I haven't started analyzing. So sorry about that. I think I can't answer it correctly.
That was a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so for this very interesting talk. And for me, it's almost also like a comment on Keith's presentation before. On one point, you raised the point before of graphical variants versus structural variants, which seems to mirror one of the core tenets of Unicode, or its ISO equivalent, that you can distinguish between glyphs or glyph variants and characters, which in many cases you can, but the less formalized the script is, the more difficult it becomes to make this distinction. And how did you handle it in your case when you brought this up? Where did you draw the boundary between seeing this as just a glyph variant of the same character, or generally as a separate entity? Or is there a large consensus of where you draw the boundary in this particular case?
Question about this question, also discussed with it. So far, we just distinguish with the glyph variation and structure like variation, like what I showed just now. But the next step, maybe we need to discuss about how to choose, or how to, should we keep all the characters or just choose one character? Yeah, we still discussing it. So sorry, I don't know how to. Yeah, I don't know. I also don't know how to answer this question. Because we still discussing it. So sorry. Yeah.
But you've also documented in your thesis how the politics of the local communities are also involved. So in those issues, it is not necessarily straightforward. Yeah. Are there any more questions? Lawrence.
Thank you. It's a follow-on from the previous question, really. Well, I think it is. It's, do you or do the local communities have ways of disambiguating the different forms? And are they casual or are they formal, the different glyphs for the same character? What terms do they use to say, we're using this one in this community, not this one? But how do they refer to those different? Is it only academics who use terminology to use differently?
No, it's not formal, I think, because there is no standard for the identity. Yeah, so they just choose what they want. So that's the reason why we want to standardize it, because different regions with different culture, the same, maybe the culture shows the same meaning and pronunciation, but have different forms. So that's very big question, I think, here. So right now, I know that because Yunnan Forest published a dictionary, so most of Yunnan, this region, they use the characters on the dictionary, the Guizhou use their own characters, so but this is different.
Using the same name.
Use the same, maybe have the same pronunciation, but different shapes. But yeah, I don't know.
And verbally, it's the same. Verbally, it's the same sound for the name.
It depends. Maybe maybe the pronunciation is also different. It's different character. Maybe it's here the same pronunciation, but the other one maybe here the different pronunciation. It depends. So it's very complicated. Sometimes people can
Confidence goes die in minority scripts. Okay, wonderful.
I'm going to say, Chen, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.